Good evening. Good to be with you. Tonight we're doing as I said last week, the Pharisee and the Republican. When I was a kid, I actually thought that was right, that's what it was. My parents were strong Republicans, our family was, and I liked that the Republican was kind of the hero of the story. But it's the publican, another name for someone holding a public service position, that of a tax collector. I've chosen to title it it should actually be session 8 up there, and should be the sinners. So I like the title of sinners for the story, because both the Pharisee and the tax collector are sinners. As of all the stories we're looking at, this one in particular, along with the others, appears in the travel narrative in Luke. So Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to be taken up, Luke says, that is, to ascend back to the Father. And he's between Galilee and Jerusalem. And that area between there is called Samaria, and it's a pretty dangerous area to travel in, was then. And while he's traveling, he carries on this wonderful series of stories and conversation with his disciples. I mention this every week because I want to keep drilling down into this, that the stories that Jesus tells illustrate the power of conversational story for witness. So that just as Jesus, as he was training his disciples and traveling with his disciples, told stories in conversational language, so our witness is blessed by the stories that we tell. I think I might have started this particular course with this story, but I'm going to tell it again because stories are meant to be repeated. We have stories that in our family that my kids have heard, that some are even titled. I won't give you the titles, but I've told them so many times they know the stories. But the story that I'm thinking of is one first told by Elie Wiesel. I think I might have told this the first session, about a series of rabbis over decades of history. And he shares the fable, or the story, of first Rabbi Israel, who when his people were threatened with some possible catastrophe, would go into the woods, into the forest, and would light a fire, and then pray, and lo and behold, things went well for his people. And then decades down the line, Rabbi Israel's disciple, Magid, faced misfortune with his people. And he went to the same place in the forest and prayed, "Master of the universe, I do not know how to light the fire, but I can say the prayer." And he did, and the miracle was accomplished. Still much later, Moshe faced trouble with his people and went to the forest and said, "I don't know how to light the fire, and I don't know the prayer, but I do know the place, and I hope that's enough." And it was. Finally, many years later, another rabbi, Rabbi Israel, sat in his chair at home with his head in his hands. He and his people faced misfortune. He said, "I don't know how to light the fire, I don't know the prayer, and I don't know the place in the woods to go to. But I do know the story, and I hope that's enough." And it was. And Wiesel goes on to say, Wiesel, remember, was a Jew who survived the Holocaust, went through Auschwitz and made it through, actually. He closes the story by saying God created man because he loves stories. And God does love a story, doesn't he? I mean, the stories that we have in our scriptures are just treasures for sure. So what I'm trying to do in this course is motivate you, especially in your small groups. We try to do that each week in some way, to tell your stories that relate to this story. And as we've said each week, when our story connects with Jesus' story and the story of another, great things happen in terms of evangelism. So we look to Jesus' story, his own life story, but also all the stories he told. And we find that to be an amazing source of truth for our own stories, then connecting with his and connecting with the person with whom we're witnessing. And where those three stories intersect, the story of Jesus, my story, your story, that's where great things happen in terms of talking about our faith. So I've been really hard on systematic theologians in this course because I'm not sure their language is what works. I'm not sure We'll look at a word today, actually. Propitiation is a word that you're going to necessarily use in your personal witness. Propitiation. Or maybe if you can even soften that a little bit with expiation. Most people don't know what either of those words mean. They mean the same thing. But systematic theologians like to use highfalutin nouns. I think Jesus liked to use wonderful stories to carry the truth. And so the secret of good witness is where those three stories come together. All right. So let's take a look at this well-known text together. He, Jesus, also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. That's a classic description of whom? The Pharisee, okay? They trusted in themselves, that is, if they were going to be righteous before God, it would be because they earned that righteousness. They trusted not in God, certainly not in the coming Messiah, not even, we'll look at the Pharisees in just a little bit, not even in what was going on in the temple so much. They trusted their own righteousness for them to be righteous before God, and in the process treated all the unrighteous, the unclean, with contempt. All right, so two men went up into the temple to pray. One a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, and we want to talk about why did he stand by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. That's an interesting run of sinners there. We'll talk a little bit about that. Now, so he's grateful that he's not like, especially this tax collector. I fast twice a week. Twice a week he fasts. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. There's a better translation for that. That's the one you probably learned with this story. I'm going to make a case for a richer translation. All right? We'll get to that. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified, righteous, rather than that first man. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Just a few verses, really, to give us this particular story. So let's move to the broader context of the story. And to do that, we need to get to know the four Jewish sects in the first century AD at the time of Christ. The Pharisees, the first of those sects, was really formed at a time when Judaism was at risk. This was the period of the Seleucid or Greek kings that ruled over Israel in the 2nd century BC. All right, during that time, it was difficult to be a Jew. There was an attempt at genocide even. So if you were the mother of a baby that was circumcised, that baby was killed and hung around the mother's neck for 30 days and then finally disposed of. They ran a herd of swine or pigs through the Holy of Holies in the temple. Okay, so this is the Seleucid kings, 2nd century. And if you ever heard the name Maccabees, that's the brothers who led the revolution to overthrow the Seleucid or Greek kings in 165 BC. And what holiday do we get from that? Hanukkah, very good. That's where Hanukkah comes from. The lighting of lights to recall the defeat of the Greek kings in Israel at the time of the 2nd century before Christ. So it's interesting then that the Pharisees during that period of time rise up as a sect to preserve Judaism coming under Greek influence. So the Pharisees, it's important to remember, were the ones who saved Judaism at a time when it was really at risk. But they also saved some important aspects of being a Jew, one of which was the adherence to not only the written laws of God in their scriptures, but also the oral tradition of the laws, the customs that they were to follow, and achieved righteousness by obedience to the law. So the Pharisees were the true conservatives among Jews, and they cherished righteousness before God, and that righteousness was achieved through honoring the Torah and the other oral traditions within Judaism. They also saved for Judaism at that time a commitment to life after death, to a physical resurrection. So when they were under the influence of the Greeks, remember when Paul was in Athens on Mars Hill and he mentioned the resurrection? Everybody kind of, yeah, right. That kind of a response to the resurrection. Well, that's what the Greeks felt, that when you die, your soul continues to live, but this body is worthless. So there was this put down of the physical body. The Pharisees were the ones that were conservative enough to say, no, we've always taught since Job, and Job is early, that the body continues to live on after death. In my flesh, the book of Job, I shall see God. So I know we're really hard on the Pharisees, but let's understand they really served Judaism in terms of saving it from Greek influence. Now, so remember about the Pharisees. The way they get right with God is by obeying the Torah and the oral traditions. And they had a long list of oral traditions, 613 laws that everybody had to live by. That's what survives from the time of Christ. So when the temple's destroyed, Judaism loses the other groups, really, that are the sects within Judaism. They lose the Sadducees. Why? Because the Sadducees were tied to the temple. They were all focused on the temple. The high priest was a Sadducee. So temple worship was what they were about. 70 AD, the Romans come through, raise the temple, take it down, and now there's no longer animal sacrifice. There's no longer these beautiful services that were done with the Levite choirs and the sacrifices, the incense, just beautiful to see and to hear. That's all gone in 70 AD. And gone with it are the Sadducees. They were the ones that were influenced by the Greeks, and they're the ones that denied the resurrection, that there was any physical resurrection. Those are the Sadducees. The Essenes were a group of today we call them pretty much hermit monks, but they went away to create a community that was committed to copying the scriptures and waiting for the Messiah. So they gathered around the Qumran caves south of Jerusalem. Some of you have been there. And from those caves, in 1947, a goat herder, a young guy, 14 years old, remember, loses his goat and tries to find him and throws a rock into a cave to try to scare the goat out, and he hears something inside the cave. It's the rock against a pot of scrolls. And so these Qumran scrolls that the Essenes copied end up being an incredible resource for Christians and Jews. For instance, the whole book of Isaiah on a single scroll is found in the Essenes cave in Qumran. So they are famous for preserving the scriptures, the Essenes, and famous for trying to live a pure life. They were probably celibates. Some believe that John the Baptist could have possibly been a part of that sect. We don't know that for sure. Again, we're strong on purification rites. And finally, the Zealots. Jesus had a disciple named Simon, not Simon Peter, but Simon the Zealot, were committed to overthrowing Roman occupation. So there was another name for them that had to do with the knives that they used in revolution. Their attempt was to throw the Roman Empire out of Israel. Those are the four sects, but we're concerned with the Pharisees in particular, and they were the rabbis, the teachers, the ones that probably survived the destruction of the temple to give us Judaism as we have it today. If you've wondered, do Jews today in their synagogues slaughter animals? No, they don't. That's done with. So what's left of Judaism? Honoring the Torah, treasuring the Word of God, the Torah, and living by the Torah. Judaism today has a God sense. Orthodox Judaism has a belief in a coming Messiah who has not yet arrived. But primarily, Judaism today is living a good life according to the laws of God. So the Pharisees are still holding sway today in terms of what contemporary Judaism teaches. And whether we're talking about Orthodox Judaism or going all the way to Reform, Reform Judaism almost takes God out of the equation. But conservative and Orthodox Judaism honors it. But the Pharisees are still, as I said, definitely holding sway still today in Judaism. So that's the Pharisee. The tax collector, most of us know how that worked. The tax collector was a Jewish person that contracted out with the Roman government to collect taxes that were sent on to the Roman government through someone there locally. So he reported to a local, sometimes even a member or a soldier or a tribune. He reported and sent the money on to Rome through that person. But what happened with the tax collectors is that they could charge as much as they wanted and would basically overcharge people in taxes and keep the money for themselves. So they were seen not only as traitors, but as crooks. And that's the tax collector that's coming to the temple for prayer. And then temple worship at the time of Christ, we can't go into a lot of detail about that, but I think the important detail for this story is there's always a debate on this story. Were these guys just at the temple on their own? They just decided to go up to the temple? Or were they there perhaps at the 2 times of corporate worship that were scheduled every day in the temple? That was at dawn, very early in the morning, and then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the same things happened. You sacrificed a lamb, so there was a lamb sacrificed, and you could smell the burning flesh of that lamb and know that that lamb died to atone for your sins. That lamb was the propitiation, the expiation, the atoning sacrifice for sin. And also following that, there was singing, the Levite songs, and you could join in if you wanted to. There was back and forth liturgy like we do in the Lutheran Church. And there was also, most significantly, I think, the burning of incense. And as the incense went up, following the atoning sacrifice, I am now atoned for by that sacrifice. And the incense, as it goes up to heaven toward God, my prayers go up as well. So an ideal time for corporate prayer, and there were corporate prayers that were spoken by the priests and the Levites, but it was also a time for individual prayer. So I think that what happened here in this story was that you had a Pharisee that probably was there for both services every day because he's racking up points for righteousness. He didn't miss a service. He's there at dawn, he's there at late afternoon. And you got a tax collector who's probably snuck his way in, hasn't been there for a while maybe. But he's not somebody that necessarily is there on a regular basis. So you can think of attendance at worship. The Pharisee's the one who gets did you ever get little attendance things in Sunday school? Man, I used to wear those with such pride. I had to lean this way almost. It was so heavy. On the, you got another little bar for each year that you were in Sunday school. Well, that's the kind of thing a Pharisee would love. So they're both there. They're in different places, but they're both apart from, and we'll look at this, they're apart from the other worshipers who are there in worship for different reasons. But I believe they're there at a corporate worship time, either at the morning service or the afternoon service. And in the process of all of this happening, the atoning sacrifice, the incense, the corporate liturgical responses. I didn't mention the Levite choir, or maybe I did, that's going on as well. They take time for individual prayer. So I'd like you to think about yourself a little bit. Does that happen to you in worship sometimes? Is it possible that during worship you're not necessarily 100% engaged with what's printed on your folder or what's on the screen? That you might actually be involved in some very serious and significant personal prayer? Or could it even be that during one of Pastor Steve's sermons, you suddenly zone him out, and because he said something that triggered something for you personally, and now you're taking that and you're working on it? And is that okay? Steve says it's okay. I think it's definitely okay. So you might miss 5 minutes of the sermon, but some really good stuff goes on. And Steve, that's when they come up to us after and say, boy, when you were talking about this, and I think, I never said anything about that. Well, that's because they were on a rabbit hole thing, going someplace where you weren't even thinking about that. So that's what I think the setting is. And again, if I could be any place in history among my 10 places I'd like to be, I'd love to be in first century temple worship. Just experience what that might have been like, because I think it was exquisite and beautiful and rich and wonderful in many, many ways. So think about every day that's going on in Jerusalem. Every day, morning and evening services. And God bless him, that Pharisee didn't miss a service. All right. So that's the broad context. Let's look a little bit more now at the immediate context. The sinner's story follows the story of the nagging woman and the unrighteous judge. Remember, that's the woman who just keeps coming at that judge, and okay, finally he gives her what she wants. The confidence we can have in prayer, to go to God in prayer. So here we have more prayer. Luke is often called the gospel of prayer, because prayer is one of his major themes. Another major theme, for instance, is women in ministry. Nobody talks more about the women who follow Jesus than Luke. So it's a fitting and flowing parable following the nagging woman and the unrighteous judge. That's a story of, if an unrighteous judge, how much more will God? So from lesser to greater. The story addresses how one becomes righteous before God. So that, even though the ending is about pride and humility, the humble will be exalted, the exalted will be humbled. I think the story is primarily about how one can claim righteousness before God. We'll talk about that. The stated audience, as we already talked about, some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. All right. So let's go through this verse by verse and see where we land. All right, verse 10, 2 men went up. You always go up into the temple, like you always go up to Jerusalem. Even if you're north of Jerusalem, you go up to Jerusalem, because you're mounting Mount Zion and the Temple Mount. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. And as I said, I'd like you to recognize, I think this is accurate, that their prayers are probably framed by that atoning sacrifice, the sacrifice of a lamb, and the burning of incense for the prayers of the people. And as that's happening, as that incense is going up and the corporate prayers are being spoken, these two are present, each away from the crowd of worshipers, the corporate worshipers, for different reasons. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus. Why is he standing by himself? He's standing by himself because he knows there are people in that service, like this tax collector, who should not be there. They are unworthy to be present in the temple. They're unworthy of the sacrifice, although Pharisees didn't care that much about sacrifice. They weren't oriented toward the temple. They were oriented toward the Torah. And that's a big difference between Sadducees and Pharisees. But the Pharisee separates himself from the crowd because he feels they're unclean. He doesn't want to be tainted by their uncleanness. So the Pharisees, when they went outside, let's say to go to market, when they came home again, they washed themselves. There was a rite of washing, to wash off the goyim in case they came in contact with an unclean person. So that was a part of their ritual to stay clean before God, righteous before God. As we'll see, the tax collector stands off for himself for another reason. He doesn't feel he's worthy to be in that crowd of worshipers. He's not worthy to join the corporate group. It would be like someone coming in off the street that has a wretched history, but for some reason is led to Crossview Church and enters and decides that he's going to sit in the farthest back pew, or maybe even just stay out in the lobby, the narthex, and listen in on what's going on. He doesn't feel worthy to enter, to be there with such strong Christian people, that kind of thing. So different reasons, but both separated from the corporate worshipers. And the Pharisee sees the tax collector as a composite of the sins he sees in others. So I spent a lot of time on this, too much time, doggone it. Look at that run. I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. Now, what interested me was he loading all of these as so that the tax collector becomes a composite, because the tax collector was an extortioner. He was seen as unjust, but he throws adulterers in. So this can't be just a summary of the tax collector. It's probably more than that. It could be, this is stretching it a bit, but if you remember the story of the prodigal son, when the older son is invited to come into the party, the older son throws in, and he spent all your money on prostitutes. So it could be that kind of a thing where we're just throwing in adulterers because we're listing sins, and this guy's probably an adulterer too. So whether it all applies to the publican or to the tax collector or not, we're not sure. But he gives us a run of sinners and gives thanks that he's not like other men. So it's kind of interesting when you look at, are you familiar at all with Dante's Divine Comedy? Is that something that you probably read in high school or college? But in the Divine Comedy, Dante lists as one of the capital virtues humility. And it's the opposite of pride. So I think that's how we use the word humility and pride as well, that they're opposites. So pride in Dante's Inferno is, listen, love of self perverted to hatred and contempt for the neighbor. That's pride. Let me say it again. Love of self perverted to hatred and contempt for neighbor. It's not a sin to love yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a sin to have self-respect, self-awareness, and so forth. But when you're so proud of yourself that you have contempt for others, then we got a problem. And that's what's going on here. His pride and his righteousness leads him to make a judgment on the tax collector and on other sinners, perhaps using that list as a composite for the tax collector himself. Verse 12, I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. So the Pharisee claims a righteousness way beyond what the Mosaic laws required. Instead of fasting on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, each year, He fasts twice a week. That's amazing, actually, 2 days of fasting per week. Wow, that's impressive. And instead of tithing his grain, his wine, and his oil, he tithes everything. Whatever he has, whatever he owns, whatever he gets, he gives 10% to the temple. So he's clearly a very righteous person by the laws that he cherishes and by the God that's given him those laws, at least as far as he can see. So there is a righteousness above and beyond what is required by the law, and he knows it. All right. I'm going to claim, by the way, that this is where the story turns. This is one of, if you remember, I did a little literary criticism with you, and we talked about inverted parallelism. This is a story that perfectly fits inverted parallelism. We'll see where this is at the center of the story. All right, verse 13. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift his eyes to heaven. He's not worthy to look toward God. So his head is down, and he's beating his breast. Now, beating of the breast doesn't happen much, according to Kenneth Bailey, in the Middle East anymore. You'll see women do it still in the Middle East when they lose a son in battle, for instance. You may be seeing some video of that, women beating their breast. Men then and now in the Middle East normally would not beat their breast. And Bailey sees this as a sign of deep, deep repentance, that he would beat his breast. And why do you beat your breast? What's at your breast? Your heart. Your heart. Your heart is broken. Your heart is the center of your being. And that's the beating of the breast. So he shouts out, God be merciful to me, a sinner. Now, when he says that, I think you get a sense that he's overwhelmed by what's happening around him. The sacrifice of the lamb, incense at the holy altar of incense, the songs of the Levite choir. I didn't mention the Aaronic blessing that's given, the final prostration of worshipers. You didn't kneel, you put yourself down on the ground to receive that Aaronic benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. That was a hallowed blessing. And many people went to the temple just to receive that blessing. It'd be something, wouldn't it, if that was something that we asked all of you to do for the Aaronic blessing. When Steve says it, you all hit the ground and lay yourself completely down. I'd like to see that. I worshipped in Latvia once. I taught for a couple weeks in Latvia at the seminary there. And I went to a church on the Sunday in between, and people went to communion, and they came back to their pews on their knees. I'd never seen that before as an act of humility. They literally crawled on their knees back to their pews and then stayed on their knees until communion was over with for everybody. Just an awesome moment. But the receiving of that Aaronic benediction was, if you look at number 6, so shall you put my name on my people. So it's the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord, second time, make his face to shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you. 3 times you're designer labeled. You're given the name of Yahweh, Adonai, to take out into the world. So shall you put my name on the people. So all of that is going on, and it's so much, I think, that you get the sense of this beating of the breast and the head down, and all of this conviction going on, that he finally shouts, God be merciful to me, a sinner. Now, I can make a strong case that I could translate, God be merciful to me, a sinner. This is in the center of your handout. "O God, let it be for me. Make an atonement for me." The Greek word there is hilaskomai, which means to make an atoning sacrifice. So it's more than God be merciful to me. It's God make an atoning sacrifice for me. And that's what happens in these moments. An atoning sacrifice will make this tax collector righteous before God. And that's what he's begging for. If he's going to be made righteous, it'll be because God makes him righteous through a blood sacrifice. And if you're ever going to be righteous before God, it will be because God has made you righteous through the atoning blood of Jesus Christ. So all of those animals, hundreds of thousands of animals that were slaughtered in the temple, were just a precursor for the ultimate once-for-all sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And the book of Hebrews is basically about that. So to understand that when he says, "God be merciful to me, a sinner," I think, given this word, that he's really saying, "Oh God, make an atoning sacrifice for me." The only other place this is used is in Hebrews 2:17. Let me get that for you. So that verb, hilaskomai, is only used here and in Hebrews 2:17. And Hebrews 2:17 says, "Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make," here's the word, "propitiation for the sins of the people," to make atoning sacrifice for the sins of the people. So the only two places that this verb is used is in the mouth and the prayer of a tax collector, and in the words of the writer of Hebrews describing what Jesus has accomplished for us with his atoning sacrifice. It's a beautiful parallel. And again, I'm not sure why most of the translations ignore the sacrificial content of that verb. "Lord, make for me, God, make for me an atoning sacrifice." All right. But the tax collector, standing far off, didn't we just do that? Oh, yeah, I see. "Oh God, let it be for me." The Greek verb, there's hilaskomai. I should have had this up before. All right. Verse 14, concluding the parable. "I tell you, this man went down to his house justified," that is, righteous, "rather than the other," that is, this man, the tax collector. "For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted." So, the tax collector, not the Pharisee, goes home justified. The Greek word there is dikaios. Jesus attaches a wisdom saying to this story. You can find that same phrase about the exalted being humbled and the humbled being exalted in those verses. Righteousness then comes to the humble, not to the proud. Now, if you want to jot down some cross-references, one good one would be Proverbs 16:18. You've heard this before. Pride comes before what? Before the fall. That's Proverbs 16:18. Or if you want to see pride before the fall, where might that have started? The long tradition of pride before the fall. In the garden with Adam and Eve. Yeah, they wanted to be like God. They were stuffed up, full of themselves enough to believe that they could be on an equal level with God. And that pride led them to the fall. The old thing that the problem in the garden was not the apple on the tree, but the pear on the ground. All right, it was time for time for a humorous escape, which never happened. Okay, so be it. There are other passages. Think of Philippians 2. Jesus humbles himself, even to the point of being obedient to death, even on the cross, and then he's lifted up and exalted to the right hand of God. James 4:6 and 10 do the same thing. so that pride is often spoken of as the mother of all sins. Augustine said that pride is the mother of all sins. All right, so every week we return to the platform. What upsets the equilibrium in the story? Where's the oops? Yeah, it depends how you want to read the story, but it could be just the fact that there's a tax collector in corporate worship in the temple, and what's he doing here? Everybody knows he's a sinner, he's a traitor, he doesn't belong here. So just his presence there, or the very significant factor that you have two different people worshiping in the same place in the temple, a Pharisee and a tax collector. That's a problem. So how's this going to turn out with those two people sort of competing for the Lord's attention? Analyze a discrepancy. We get to hear about both of them. We get to hear their prayers. The clue to the resolution, in my mind, comes with the aha down there is when we realize the difference between the two of the prayers. I thank you that I'm not like this jerk over here versus God, make for me an atoning sacrifice. And then experiencing the resolution, the tax collector is declared righteous before God, and the Pharisee is not. And we anticipate that on the heels of this tremendous act of repentance and humility, that the life is changed for the tax collector, although we're never given that ending to the parable. So here's where the interesting inverted parallelism. Now remember, this is where the first introductory part of the story links up with the end of the story. The second part of the story links up with the second and last part of it. So two go up to the temple, the Pharisee and the tax collector, in that order, we're told. Look at number 7 down below. 2 go down from the temple, but the tax collector is mentioned first in this case. And the Pharisee's given second billing. That's interesting. Second point, Pharisee's manner, the Pharisee's prayer. What's his body posture? He's got his hands raised, lifted before God, making a great show of piety. And his prayer is, I thank you, Lord, that I'm not like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all that I have. And down below, number 6, the parallel, the tax collector's manner and the tax collector's prayer were given. Then third, the tax collector, Pharisee's appraisal, and the tax collector, his self-appraisal. This guy's an extortionist. He's unclean. He reminds me of adulterers. And the tax collector's self-appraisal, God, make for me an atoning sacrifice. And so you always look when there's inverted parallelism for the centermost part of the story, and that's the Pharisee's self-righteousness, his claim to being righteous before God. Isn't that kind of cool how these stories are so rhetorically structured? So Jesus is not just a storyteller, he's a master storyteller. He rivals the best of literary and rhetorical structure for stories. All right, not to be missed, corporate worship is both public and private, so that there's a place in public worship for private prayer. I really like, and I haven't noticed, Steve, if you do this or not, maybe you do sometimes, but like during the confession, to take a moment and just give people a chance to add some specificity to their confession before you move on with the absolution. So that, yes, there's a corporate confession that catches us all, but there's also a time for individual private confession. Sometimes that's done in the prayers of the church. Sometimes you can add to the prayers of the church even orally, where the pastor asks for, if you have anyone that you'd like to pray for who's sick, please say their name when the opportunity is presented. It's kind of fun around the congregation to hear that. So the prayers become very personal and more private, but now made public. So corporate worship, and I think we need to recognize that there's a lot going on at worship beyond what we as pastors design for worship. Secondly, the repentant Christian's righteousness is passive, received in Christ's atoning sacrifice. This is one of the primary contributions of Martin Luther to the revival or reformation of the church. The church at his time really taught strongly that you get righteous before God by the good deeds you do. And frankly, by the money you give, too. That's a good deed. So Luther developed this concept of two kinds of righteousness. The first kind of righteousness is an active righteousness, where you're busy being righteous out in the world. You're doing good things. You're a good neighbor. And you can be a non-Christian and have this civil righteousness. Do you have some neighbors who aren't Christians? My guess is you do. And there's some good things active in their lives that really have a good impact on others. That's civil righteousness, and it's active righteousness. Christians are involved in that. But the righteousness that matters most for Luther is passive. And it's the righteousness of what? Of faith. The righteousness of faith. That's Luther's terminology. So the righteousness of faith is the righteousness that is imputed to me through my faith in Jesus Christ. So the perfect life of Jesus Christ becomes my perfect life. I don't have to struggle to be perfect. Boy, is that good news for you if you're a perfectionist. You don't have to be perfect. Christ was perfect for you. But also, his atoning sacrifice on the cross. God make an atoning sacrifice for me. God did that in Jesus Christ, and that's what makes you righteous as you place your faith in him. So what happens to the righteousness that belongs to those who do good deeds out of faith? In other words, how do we handle the good things you do as a Christian that grow from your faith? I think I can make a fairly strong case that for Martin Luther, those good deeds are a part of your faith. They spring from your faith. That to say you're a Christian and you're a person of faith is also to say, I behave like this, because out of my faith flows my works. So Luther's ethic, we looked at this last year a little bit, can be summarized with faith active in love. So my faith by nature will do good works. And so faith and works are not separated, they are one and the same. So there's the active righteousness that we call civil righteousness, and there's passive righteousness that we simply receive, and it becomes our faith, and it produces our good works. All right, and then pride is the most dangerous of sins. It leads to other sins. It has us often in the place of God. That's why when you break any of the other commandments, you always break the first commandment too, because you're choosing to be God yourself. All right, a couple quotes here. Ben Franklin, there is perhaps no one of our natural passions so hard to subdue as pride. Beat it down, stifle it, mortify it as much as one pleases, it is still alive. Even if I could conceive that I'd completely overcome it, I should probably be proud of my humility. Yeah. That says it well, doesn't it? Yeah. And C.S. Lewis, rah, rah, rah. Pride, on the other hand, is the mother of all sins. That's not original with C.S. Lewis. And the original sin of Lucifer, the fall of the evil angels, was their wanting to be equal with God. It was a rebellion to God's supremacy. An instrument strung but preferring to play itself because it thinks it knows the tune better than the musician. Yeah, that's really good. All right, some art for you. This is a very interesting piece. This is a 17th century cathedral. It's not trying to depict the temple at all. Van Dellen was a Dutch artist who specialized in architectural paintings. And it is beautiful, isn't it? So he didn't do people. So he partnered with Palenberg who was a portrait artist, and he, after the architectural painting was done, painted these people in. And on the left, you can see the Pharisee, and in the foreground, the publican. And striking to me was how little they look, but also placing the Pharisee by that immovable pillar, I think was a stroke of genius. There would have been more people present at this time in the temple, but I like the painting because it gives you a sense of the grandeur that would have been the temple courts where they were. All right, Tissot, we usually land on Tissot, great illustrator. Again, the posture is very important. If you look closely, the tax collector is beating his breast with his left hand, and his right hand is covering his face in shame. Tissot was just wonderful as an illustrator. Rembrandt drawing, probably not complete, but wonderful in terms of the tax collector in the foreground and the Pharisee behind him on the right. Again, the grandeur of the temple. I think Rembrandt liked to try to paint the temple at times. Neither of those figures is Rembrandt himself, which is kind of refreshing because he put himself into way too many paintings. Millais, we've looked at some of his art before. The color here is wonderful. Both the Pharisee and the tax collector were probably fairly wealthy, and I think Millais captures that. Usually you hear that the Sadducees were the wealthiest of the sects. Pharisees were middle class, but were usually well provided for, and the tax collector obviously made a lot of money by cheating. Ben Dixon, colored engraving, very pointed display of the Pharisee, and the publican, the tax collector, hiding his face and hand on his heart. This one was so intriguing. I don't have a date for it, but it's a fresco at a basilica in Ottoburen. And what intrigued me was that dog. The fact that there's a dog in that painting again. No, it's the Satan behind the Pharisee. You see the Lucifer figure, and the Pharisee very much animated, and the tax collector beating his breast. That's on a wall in the basilica. A Dutch engraving that gives you kind of a key. You see some of the letters there. The D, you'd find, then that would tell you, or to kind of explain it to you. The D is the Pharisee, and the E is the publican. The publican is down at the bottom of the painting over here, away from the crowd of worshipers. And look at the Pharisee, not the painting, the etching. The Pharisee is literally on display before the worshipers. He's in front of them doing his thing. And here in the foreground, you have some people probably very impressed with the Pharisee. And then it's a nice depiction, actually, of the first century temple. Early 12th century illumination of the scriptures, both of them, in this case, side by side, because there's not a lot of room, so you provide them both there. Don't you love Bernard? Remember we looked at him last week? There he is again. He did this whole series on the parables of Jesus, And in this case, the Pharisee in the foreground and the tax collector on his knees. And take a look at that image of the tax collector, and here's another one he did separately that mirrors that beating of the breast and has him on his knees. Who needs to hear this story? Spiritually proud people who declare themselves righteous, those who are quick to judge the sins of others, and those people who have not even considered how God saves us, that they're still operating at kind of a childhood level of sophistication that says, I'm saved by being a good boy, saved by being a good girl, that my salvation is up to me, as opposed to God make for me an atoning sacrifice. Finally, some take-homes. In Jesus, no sin can ever separate me from God and God's people. I don't need to stand apart from God or from God's people. I don't need to go away by myself because my sins are so terrible. And people do this. I think of when people have been involved in something that's kind of raunchy, or even something like divorce, they're gone. They think that keeps them from worshiping with God's people. It should drive us even more to be with God's people. So because of Jesus, no sin can ever separate us from God and shouldn't separate us from God's people. Strangely, my worthiness before God is built on seeing myself as unworthy. And that ultimately will be what happens to us as we're at the edge of heaven. And why should I let you in? And the answer that God wants to hear is, you shouldn't. I'm not worthy. But I plead my entrance for the sake of what Jesus Christ has done for me. And so your unworthiness marks you as worthy for salvation. And finally, vicarious sacrifice defines my past. That is an atoning sacrifice in my place. That defines where I've come from. It confirms my present and will shape my future. God, make for me an atoning sacrifice. All right, so I think we're over time. Sorry about that. Okay, have a good conversation. We'll see you at 8:15.